Is iodine a forgotten tool of the old school, or just another overrated beekeeping myth? As shelves fill with products making bold promises, more and more experienced beekeepers are returning to one of the simplest elements in nature. But let's be completely honest right from the start. In beekeeping, there are no magic wands. There are no instant solutions. There is only a system. Science today clearly shows that the pathogen Nosema ceranae can shorten the lifespan of a bee by up to 50%. Not in theory, not under extreme conditions, but in real situations where humidity inside the hive is elevated. Imagine investing energy, time, and resources into the development of a colony, and every second bee practically disappears prematurely. That is not just a problem. That is a direct loss within the system. In this episode, we are not dealing with myths, and we are not looking for quick fixes. We are analyzing one specific question. Does iodine truly have a place in modern beekeeping, or is its role misunderstood? This is Eterna Analytics, and here we deal exclusively with facts. March is one of the most sensitive periods in the life of a bee colony. Winter bees are exhausted after a long period without natural food intake. Their organism is at the limit of endurance, and energy reserves are minimal. At the same time, new brood begins to develop and requires stable conditions. Temperature must be precisely maintained, and the interior of the hive must be clean. At that moment, microclimate becomes the key factor of survival. Temperature and humidity are not just physical parameters. They directly determine whether the colony will develop or begin to weaken. If humidity rises, the system begins to lose stability. Humidity activates pathogen spores, destabilizes the brood, and shortens the lifespan of worker bees. When a bee lives half as long and you invest the same amount of energy into its development, you lose half of the colony's potential. That is pure systemic inefficiency. In this context, the question of iodine appears. Iodine is not a medicine, and this must be completely clear. It does not treat nosema, it does not solve diseases, and it cannot save a weak colony. Iodine is a tool, and its role is strictly limited. In practice, it is used in the form of povidone iodine or Lugol's solution, but its function is not therapeutic, it is hygienic. Its primary role is to reduce microbiological pressure in the environment. This means it does not act after a problem has already appeared, but instead influences the conditions in which pathogens develop. In other words, iodine does not solve the problem, it reduces the probability that the problem will occur in the first place. This is a key difference that a large number of beekeepers do not understand. The system should not react when it is disrupted. It must be set up so that disruption does not occur. Within that framework, iodine has its place. It makes the environment less suitable for the development of microorganisms and spores, but only if the basic conditions are already stable. If the microclimate in the hive is not good, iodine will not help. If ventilation is poor and the walls are damp, pathogens will develop regardless of any additives. If varroa is out of control, no supplement can save the colony. This includes iodine as well. It is not a substitute for proper beekeeping and cannot compensate for systemic mistakes. That is why it is important to understand its application. With iodine, the rule always applies that less is more. In higher concentrations, it can be harmful and aggressive to the bee's organism, especially to its gut flora. For that reason, it is used exclusively in minimal doses. One of the first points of application is the water source. The water source is often an overlooked but critical point in the apiary. Standing water represents an ideal place for the development of bacteria, algae, and pathogens. Minimal amounts of iodine in water contribute to maintaining hygiene and reduce the possibility of microorganism development. The goal is not to treat the bees, but to maintain a clean environment from which bees collect water. The second point of application is feeding. During spring, when stimulative feeding is performed, iodine can be used in very small amounts in syrup or patties. Here we are talking about extremely low concentrations, in trace amounts. The goal is to support internal hygiene, not to directly act on the bee. It is important to emphasize that iodine is never used during the main nectar flow. At the moment when bees begin to bring in nectar intended for extraction, all preventive activity must stop. Honey must remain pure and free from any traces of additives. The responsibility of the beekeeper is not only toward the bees, but also toward the final product and the consumer. When we look at the bigger picture, iodine is only part of a system based on three fundamental pillars. The first pillar is microclimate, which means a dry and stable hive without condensation. The second pillar is nutrition, which includes natural pollen intake and adequate energy support. The third pillar is hygiene, where iodine can play its role. If the first two pillars are not fulfilled, the third has no significance. This is the most common mistake in practice. Beekeepers try to solve a problem with an additive instead of stabilizing the foundation of the system. One solution is sought, one product, one intervention. However, the hive functions as a complex system and cannot be fixed with a single move. An analytical approach shows that colonies with a stable microclimate, adequate nutrition, and low microbiological pressure develop more steadily and become more resilient. In such a system, iodine can contribute to additional stability, but it is not the key factor of success. The conclusion is simple and precise. Iodine is not a myth, but it is not a solution either. It is a tool that has value only when used within a properly structured system. If used without understanding, its effect is negligible or even negative. If used correctly, it can contribute to stability, but it will never replace the fundamental principles of beekeeping. Understanding the system is the only path to stable and sustainable beekeeping. Everything else is an attempt to simplify a complex process, which in practice always leads to losses. In the next episode, the focus shifts to an external enemy that directly attacks the bee and drains its energy. We will analyze the role of plant-based preparations and essential oils in the fight against varroa and ask the same question as today. Are these real solutions or just temporary illusions? Thank you for practicing beekeeping with understanding, attention, and logic. See you in the next episode.